I now call to speak Judy Clemenston, who is our prospective parliamentary candidate for the constituency of Surrey South West.
Lord McAlpine forgot to tell you that I'm also very nervous. However, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. During our married life, my husband and I have worked hard to provide a good home for our two daughters. We are law-abiding and honest citizens who vote in elections and trust that those elected will act on our behalf to ensure that our streets are safe, our children are well educated, and that there is a good health service to take care of us when we need it. Of course, we take an interest in current affairs, but like so many people, we try desperately to distinguish the truth from the propaganda. In fact, we are the average Mr. and Mrs. Britain. We are part of the overwhelming, silent majority who resign themselves to being unable to influence or change things to any degree, so we say and do nothing. Until now, that is. Now, the major political parties have stepped beyond the boundaries of the mandate given to them by the people and have assumed the right to play party politics with our sovereignty. The issue of Britain's future role in Europe is too big for complacency, and it is more important than a Labour or a Conservative victory at the next election. Just this once, we must put the nation before party politics and vote for a referendum. This is a chance for the silent majority to be heard, and whether in the democratic process of such a referendum the people decide to go forwards towards a federal Europe, or whether the European community remains a group of sovereign nations, the decision will have been made by the people, for the people. In the next few weeks, our political leaders will stand in silence to remember those who gave their lives in 2 world wars. Well, when they remember them, let them also remember that those who gave their lives did so to keep us a free and sovereign nation. If it was worth fighting for then, ladies and gentlemen, it's worth fighting for now. I would now like to introduce our next speaker to you, Terry Smith. Terry is a respected economic and financial analyst. He wrote the book Accounting for Growth, which topped the Sunday Times bestseller list. It explained why he and some other people felt creative accounting was closer to misleading accounting. Terry is our prospective parliamentary candidate for Guildford. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Terry Smith.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As an alternative to the idea of keeping to the script which I've been requested, I thought I'd try speaking quickly, see how we get on. We heard Sir Alan Walters talk to us about the subject of money. I'm here to talk about an equally important subject, other people's money, or more particularly other people's debts. I want to start my talk by posing a question for you. What's the similarity between the late Robert Maxwell and our European partners? The answer, quite simply, is in their attitude to pensions. In Britain, we've behaved prudently. Large sums of money, some £600 billion, according to recent estimates, have been invested in company and private pension funds. This money represents capital which has been put aside or saved so that incomes are available for our future pensioners. People who pay money into company schemes or private pension plans are secure and confident in the knowledge the funds will be there when they retire, unless, of course, it's the Mirror Group fund. Even the previously nationalised industries, British Telecom, British Gas, the electricity companies, have vast pension funds with the intention of making sure funds are available when their staff retire. Contrast this with the position on the continent. In most continental countries, little money has been set aside to provide for future pensions. The capital has not been created to ensure those pensions will be available for the pensioners of the future. All EU governments use the public pension contributions of today's workers to pay the pensions of those who've already retired. In the same way, pension contributions made by those who've already retired were used to pay previous obligations. While the UK is well placed to honour its debts to its pensioners, our continental partners are living beyond their means, raiding the contributions made by their workers for future pensions in order to pay off past debts. It's for this reason that the continental countries can be said to have adopted the Maxwell approach. Just use the money paid by the workers for their future pensions to pay off all your debts. This problem of little money being put aside on the continent is compounded by the generosity of the pensions these countries promise to pay, and by the fact their populations are ageing more rapidly than ours in the UK, increasing the burden which must be carried by the population currently at work. Between now and the middle of the next century, the number of people working in these countries will drop in relation to the number of pensioners, so less working people will have to support more pensioners. You may recall that Benjamin Franklin said that only two things were certain in life, death and taxes. It wouldn't have made such a catchy phrase, but in fact demographics are also pretty predictable. We can forecast what our population will be decades ahead. In Italy, in 1950, there were more than 8 people of working age to support each pensioner. Today, there are between 4 and 5. By the middle of the next century, there will be less than 2 people of working age to support each pensioner. 2 instead of 8. As you can see, I believe a picture's worth 1,000 words. Probably worth about 10,000 of my words, but there are. Because of this gap between money received from those who are working and the money owed to those who have retired, most of our European partners are developing huge liabilities for which no money has been set aside. Now, estimating the size of these liabilities is certainly complex, but a recent piece of research published just last month by the OECD in Paris shows the effect of current policies on the public finances of some EU countries could be devastating. Using the approach of the OECD figures, employed in a recent study by the senior economist of international bankers Merrill Lynch, you find that for the period to 2070, the average liability for a person in the UK in today's money for these future pension liabilities is just a little over £1,000. In contrast, the average liability per capita for the other countries in the EU combined is about £26,000. Now, if honest accounting policies are adopted, such as those that companies are required to follow, government debt on the continent would be vastly higher than it's currently officially stated. These governments have simply not taken into account the debts they owe to pensioners, despite my view that these are the most solemn that must be honoured in any society. But this hidden debt is not mentioned. The graph shows how much greater the government debt of our main EU partners would be if they were to include these pension liabilities in addition to their official debt as defined under the Maastricht Treaty. There can be little doubt we will be asked by Brussels to, quote, harmonise this indebtedness. I wonder what harmonise means in that context. In other words, the debt will be spread across all countries. When speaking to the European Parliament in 1995, Jacques Delors, the former President of the European Commission himself, said, and I quote, "Economic and monetary union means, for instance, that the European Union recognises the debts of all countries in EMU." Now that could cost the UK some £1.2 trillion. Now when I wrote this I was a bit confused about what a trillion meant. That, for the avoidance of doubt, is 1,200 billion pounds. That's quite a lot in anyone's money really, isn't it? Whichever currency we denominate it in, even in the lira. If this potential debt were divided on the basis of the population of each European country. Let me explain how that figure was reached. The total unfunded debt of the member states for which figures are available would be as much as £7.88 trillion. Now the UK accounts for about 16% of the total population of these countries. So if we were forced to take on a share of this unfunded pension liability of these countries on the basis of our share of the population, we would be liable for 16% of £7.88 trillion. The huge sum of £1.28 trillion. By deducting the UK's own unfunded liabilities, we have some, but much lower, £60 billion from this figure. It's clear that the additional burden for the UK as a single currency could be as much as the figure that I gave you earlier, £1.22 trillion. Now, the other way of looking at it, because I still had difficulty getting my mind of what £1.22 trillion means to us, is to say, how much do we have to pay each? That's nearly £21,000, actually it's £20,808 for those who are precise, for every man, woman and child in the UK. That's a staggering figure. It's impossible to conceive how we could fund such a debt. Even if we were not to enter the single currency, mechanisms already exist which would allow these debts to be shared between EU countries, with the UK picking up some of the bill for this continental profligacy. The community budget could be modified, for example, so as to assist areas with, quote, demographic imbalances. I can almost hear now that it would be argued the UK has received an unfair competitive advantage in labour market terms by paying low state pensions. Labour costs down. We'll be penalised because we have been now paying ourselves such a low amount. There will be rules for a, quote, level playing field, which could lead to this high education. I've given you a lot of complex figures there about this hidden debt which threatens us all. So I'd like to end with a very simple analogy to explain the threat to you. Let us assume, which I hope is correct, that you've all been prudent and saved for your retirement. I certainly haven't. I've made no provision whatsoever. I've spent every penny of my income as I've received it. And as retirement looms, I know that I'll face a crisis. So I've got a simple proposition for you. Why don't we share your savings? Now, if any of you think that the proposition which I've just put forward is fair, I'd like to meet each time and would be delighted to. If, however, you don't, you just learned a very valuable lesson in saving for your old age Euro style. Thank you.